Nick Fuentes just dropped what might be the most pathetic damage control session in dissident right history. The same guy who built his career being the most uncompromising voice in politics is now doing mental gymnastics trying to rebrand himself as some misunderstood moderate. This isn't just political commentary, this is watching a man realize his brand has become a career dead end. We're about to dissect every cope, contradiction, and moment where this dude basically admits he's been playing a character for clout. This breakdown is going to expose exactly what happens when internet edgelords realize they want real power more than ideological purity.
My YouTube feed is full of black people reacting to your content and agreeing with you. Smiley face emoji. Quite endearing, I must say. The blacks love you. Nick.
Yeah, it's so funny. Because I got called a racist forever, and now my monologue about black people's going viral, and all the black people are reacting to it, and they're all agreeing with it for the most part. And, you know, look, it only makes common sense. I'm not a racist in the true sense of like hating other races for who they are, or what is widely considered to be a racist.
And we're off to the races with the most transparent rebrand attempt in political history. Nick's essentially saying, I'm not racist by my definition, just everyone else is. You built your name being the guy who says what others won't say, and now you're shocked that people remember what you said.
But I came of age in this politically correct period where if you were white and did not hate yourself and were not constantly tripping over yourself to apologize to or cater to black people, you were called a white supremacist. And I feel like that was the category that I got boxed into. I was never up here just like preaching hatred. That was never the case. And I always got along with black people. I always got along with Bryson Gray. I got along with the Hodge twins. I got along with
the I have black friends defense in action. This is actually embarrassing. Nick's pulling out the most basic normie conservative talking points like he's some boomer at a country club trying to prove he's not racist. The guy who built his career on being intellectually superior to mainstream conservatives is now using their exact same tired arguments. Look, I talked to the Hodge twins once.
Myron, Sneeko, Ye. I always got along with black people. I had these controversial views, but I believe I was boxed in because, again, you know, from the time that Michael Richards did that comedy routine where he said the N-word 1,000 times, and like a few years ago, it was so politically correct. Again, if you were not a self-hating white person, you're racist. If you went out there and said, look, I'm white, I'm proud to be white, I like white people, and I have nothing to apologize for, they would say, wow, you're a racist piece of shit. They say, you're a fucking white male, you have no culture. Step aside, your time is over. And, you know, the inverse of that is if you were not tripping over yourself to not offend black people. Like, yes, I have said the N-word on the show. I've uttered that word. I know it's a crime. It's practically a blasphemy. But it's like if you're a white person that doesn't let them control your speech, you're racist. If you're not tripping over yourself to apologize and pander to their feelings about crime or these other topics, you're a bad person. I was just ahead of the curve. I think black and white people have realized that there was this excess. I felt like the good guy. And for 10 years, for basically just disagreeing, I'm not a hateful person, but for disagreeing, they just shit down my throat and called me the worst things. I was ostracized from society. My high school friends wanted nothing to do with me. I couldn't get a job. I was banned from PayPal, banned from banks, banned from politics. And everybody would just say, oh, you're that piece of shit Nazi? Fuck you. Someone should kill you. And it's like, why? I do a talk show because I disagree? Because I think we had too much immigration? Because I know and say for a fact that Israel is influencing our country? And they started to make me feel like the bad guy. And in some ways I leaned into that, I think. Not too often, but you know, there's some unfortunate clips where I think we leaned into being bad. Because they made us feel like we were bad. They made us feel like for speaking our minds and saying what we thought was right and expressing our values and our identity, like, look, I'm white, I'm Christian, this is what matters to me, we were made to feel like we shouldn't exist, like we should go and kill ourselves or die, or that someone should kill us. Just because, and I don't think my show ever was really hateful or anything like that. And it wasn't fair. And we had no megaphone. I was some kid, and the ADL and Fox News and like Daily Wire were trying to get me killed. And so they started to make me feel like the villain, and you start then to lose hope in what's good, because you say, if I'm doing the right thing, if I'm trying to do the right thing, if I'm being honest, and I'm getting lied about and slandered and like crucified for this, well, then, you know, what the fuck? Maybe there is no such thing as a happy ending. And so what's been emotional about this whole year is, for the first time, I feel like the good guy. When I get to shine.
This is the most revealing line in the entire monologue. Nick's admitting that his primary motivation isn't ideological conviction, it's wanting to feel like the good guy. Real dissidents don't care about being liked by the mainstream. They care about being right. This obsession with respectability and wanting to shine exposes everything about what's really driving this rebrand attempt.
Now that censorship and cancel culture has receded, here's the challenge. It is to translate a movement that was reactive and resentful into a movement that is progressive. And what I mean by that is, I'm not satisfied with where we are. How do we push ahead? Not based on grievance and resentment and revenge. How do we push ahead based on building an American society that we all want to live in? Rather than just being angry, anti-white, black people. You know, 10 years ago, we were really under the boot. And I don't think we should take our foot off the gas. But it's going to be kind of like a tricky thing to do, to translate the politics of like a Charlottesville or a J6th into a politics of, what if the future inventors and innovators and architects, you know, the actual visionaries are going to share our politics. The builders, the progressives, the people that want to move society forward. How do we keep our foot on the gas without leaning into bitterness? How do we let go of some of those emotions, the anger, and treat our former adversaries with a kind of beneficence, with a kind of magnanimity? Which is to say, in other words, like, we are the future. Everyone is a Groyper. Everyone is America first. Our former foes, our former opponents, the black people, the white people, the Christians, everybody else. How do we embrace them as part of our larger agenda? How do we bring them in a way that doesn't compromise our values and our vision, but that is magnanimous, that is letting go of some of those negative feelings from before, because we have a bigger vision. You know, the vision is bigger than this cycle of political grievance. It's about, you know, really fundamentally transforming America in such a way that everyone will wake up one day and say, we're all Groypers now.
All right, let's cut through all the bullshit and analyze what we just witnessed, because this video reveals something much deeper about the state of dissident politics, the psychology of internet political figures, and the fundamental weakness that plagues movement politics in the digital age. What we're watching here isn't ideological evolution or strategic repositioning. It's the complete psychological breakdown of someone who finally realized he painted himself into a corner and is now desperately trying to escape the consequences of his own choices. Nick Fuentes built his entire brand on being the most uncompromising voice in American politics. He was the guy who would say what Tucker Carlson wouldn't say, what mainstream conservatives were too scared to say, what even other dissidents thought was too risky to say publicly. And for a while, that strategy worked brilliantly. He carved out a unique niche in the political commentary space, built a loyal following of young men who felt like he was the only person speaking their language, and positioned himself as the intellectual leader of what he called the America First movement. He was getting millions of views, making good money, and felt like he was at the forefront of a political revolution that would eventually sweep the country. But then something happened that Nick clearly didn't anticipate. The political landscape shifted, and his brand became a liability instead of an asset. Trump won the election, MAGA went mainstream, America First became Republican orthodoxy, and suddenly all the positions that Nick thought made him a visionary started being advocated by people with actual political power. The problem is, those people didn't want to be associated with Nick Fuentes because he had spent years making himself radioactive with inflammatory rhetoric and controversial statements. So now Nick finds himself in the worst possible position for any political commentator. He's intellectually irrelevant and socially toxic simultaneously. His ideas have been vindicated and adopted by the mainstream, but he personally has been left out in the cold. He's watching people who were more moderate than him get access to real political power while he's still stuck streaming to the same audience of teenagers and social outcasts. This video is Nick's attempt to solve this problem, but it reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how political brands work. He seems to think that if he just moderates his tone and adds some disclaimers to his controversial positions, people will forget the last decade of his content and welcome him into the mainstream conservative fold. But that's not how reputation works, especially in the internet age where everything is archived forever. More importantly, this rebrand attempt reveals the psychological weakness that was always at the core of Nick's operation. Look at his obsession with being seen as the good guy. Look at his desperate need for mainstream validation and social approval. Look at how he frames every controversial thing he ever said as a misunderstanding or a reaction to unfair treatment. This is not the psychology of a genuine political dissident. This is the psychology of someone who got into politics for personal validation and social status. Real dissidents accept being hated because they believe their cause is more important than their personal comfort. They don't spend hours explaining why they're actually good people who were just misunderstood. They don't desperately seek approval from the very establishment they claim to oppose. They understand that revolutionary change requires sacrificing personal popularity for political effectiveness. Nick wants to be loved. He wants to be respected. He wants to feel like the hero of his own story where everyone eventually realizes he was right all along. And that fundamental weakness, that need for validation, is what's driving this entire pathetic rebrand attempt. This approach satisfies no one. His core audience feels betrayed because they followed him specifically because he was willing to say things others wouldn't say. If they wanted moderate conservative commentary, they could get that from 100 other sources with better production values and less baggage. Meanwhile, mainstream conservatives aren't going to welcome him with open arms just because he learned how to add disclaimers to his racial arguments. So what Nick has accomplished with this video is the worst of both worlds. He's alienated his base while failing to win over new supporters. He's revealed himself to be ideologically hollow while also demonstrating that he lacks the strategic intelligence to execute a successful rebrand. He's shown that he was never the principled dissident he pretended to be, just another internet personality chasing clout and validation. But there's an even deeper lesson here about the nature of movement politics in the digital age. Nick's entire career was built on the assumption that being the most extreme voice in the room would eventually make him the most influential voice in the room. He thought that by staking out the most radical positions, he would become the intellectual leader of everyone who agreed with softer versions of those positions. The problem with this strategy is that it confuses attention with influence, controversy with authority, and audience size with political power. Nick got attention by being extreme, but that same extremism made him politically impotent. He built an audience by saying shocking things, but that audience was composed of people with no real political influence themselves. Meanwhile, more moderate voices who said more palatable versions of the same things were building relationships with actual power brokers, getting invited to important meetings, and positioning themselves to influence real policy decisions. Nick was playing for social media metrics while they were playing for political access. And now that the political landscape has shifted in his direction, Nick is discovering that all his controversy and attention and audience size means nothing if the people with real power won't associate with him. He built a brand that was perfectly designed for internet fame and completely unsuited for political influence. This is the fundamental contradiction at the heart of internet politics. The things that make you popular online often make you irrelevant offline. The very extremism that builds your digital following becomes the baggage that prevents you from accessing real political power. And once you realize this, you're stuck with a terrible choice: maintain your principles and accept political irrelevance, or moderate your positions and risk losing your audience. Nick is trying to thread this needle with this rebrand attempt, but it's almost certainly going to fail because he's fundamentally misunderstanding what his value proposition was. His audience didn't follow him because he was a moderate conservative with good production values. They followed him because he was willing to say things that moderate conservatives wouldn't say. Take that away, and what's left? Just another political commentator with a controversial past and a small audience. The real irony is that if Nick had actually been the principled dissident he pretended to be, he wouldn't be in this situation. If he had built his brand on substantive intellectual arguments rather than inflammatory rhetoric, if he had focused on building coalitions rather than burning bridges, if he had prioritized political effectiveness over personal validation, he might actually be in a position to influence policy now that his ideas have become mainstream. Instead, he's stuck doing damage control videos trying to convince people that he was never really the person everyone saw him being for the last decade. And the most pathetic part is that he seems to genuinely believe this is going to work. This video isn't just the story of one internet personality's failed rebrand attempt, it's a cautionary tale about the difference between building an audience and building a movement, between seeking attention and seeking influence, between being popular and being powerful. Nick Fuentes thought he was playing chess when he was really just playing for likes and shares. Now he's discovering that the internet is not real life, and viral content is not political power.